I'm really pleased to have opportunity to join you in launching the book of poems called Tilted Ground by Alyson Hallett. And I'm sure you've got the book in front of you. Here it is. It's a great book. And one of the things that impressed me most about it was just the way, Alison, in which you captured your own personal experience in visiting the Heriot campus and looking at some of the work that's going on in the Lal Centre and with our partners in BGS. Your encounter with things of the earth, your visits out, including a field trip, your journeys around the campus, looking at the other monuments and statues. And I think what you'll find in this book is a great range of poems that are poems of shape, literally by the way in which you've arranged some of the words on the page, and poems that convey a very strong sense of belonging of an individual connecting with the earth. I was really interested in the review on the back that Penelope Shuttle wrote. Thank you, Penelope. And the first sentence sums it up for me. It says, "These are love letters to stone, rock, and the earth." And indeed they are. And as I conclude, may I read to you my favorite poem from the book. It's a very short poem. It's called Universal Syllabus 1. Whatever we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. Discuss. So may I wish you a very pleasant time, and I may wish everybody an enjoyable time as they read your book, Alyson. And thank you to Emeritus Professor Pat Corbett for his work. Pat has been a university poet in residence for 2 years and has been inspirational in encouraging us to think about our creativity and innovation. Thank you for all that you do. May I wish all members of the Watt Club and all of our current students and staff great enjoyment as you discover Tilted Ground. Thank you.
So a big thank you to our Principal and Vice Chancellor, Richard Williams, for that fantastic introduction. And I can see I'm joined on screen now by Alyson and Pat, and I'm going to stop talking and let you two lead us on. So many thanks, and I'll speak to you both later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Good evening, everybody. I'm Patrick Corbett, now formally retired from the university, but at the time of the residency I was Professor of Petroleum Geoengineering and a role as the university poet. So let me start also by welcoming all the visitors to this special Watt Club event. The Watt Club is thought to be the oldest alumni association in UK, established back in 1854, with the unveiling of a statue that now sits at the front of the main entrance of our university. It was this statue that greeted Alyson as she stepped off the bus that November morning in 2019, and don't those pre-pandemic days now seem like a very different age? The residency was a bit of a wild idea, encouraged by two poets on the staff, Professor Mairead Nick Craith and Ruth Aylett, to invite a poet to spend some time with us. It took some controlling of the powers that be, notably our head of school, Professor Malcolm Crisp, as this was a bit of a pioneering effort for Heriot Watt. We'd never had a poet in residence as far as I was aware. So we had to raise some funds to bring somebody to Redden campus for a week. And ultimately we were gratefully helped by Alyson's friends who provided some accommodation for Edinburgh. We couldn't even find enough for a glorious hotel room for Alyson, so she was luckily put up by her friends in Edinburgh. We did advertise widely, and we received an amazing 50 applications. I think this was quite a surprise at the time. Alyson's application stood out because of her experience in previous residencies, her interest in mental health, and above all, as she is the stone poet. Why is she the stone poet? Well, her work with migrating stones for the past 20 years. She's a geological process herself. She makes a journey with the stones and have a line of poetry carved into them, and she cites them in different countries around the world. Alyson was also the country's first poet in residence in a university geography department, actually my old university as well, Exeter University. She's following us around. And with a Leverhulme grant. She was also Charles Causley Poet in Residence, that's in Launceston. And she has published numerous books of sole-authored poetry, as well as books that have been collaboratively written. She would be able to feed my interest in poetry and poets, a field and group of people that I had little interaction with up to that time. To reach out, I think, to new people, new groups of people, it's quite important to get to know them well when you are trying to reach out to new people. Now, many across Heriot-Watt know me as a petroleum geologist and engineer, not as a poet. This initiative to see if we could get some communication going with people outside our normal technical, scientific echo chamber, as it were. I felt a poet could bring in a different perspective, and that I might also learn a few things about matters poetic through this initiative. We were, and indeed are still working, close collaboration with the British Geological Survey partners in the newly established Lyell Centre, another reason for doing an initiative like this, named after the famous 18th century geologist Charles Lyell, in earth and marine science and technology. For this reason, it just had to be a poet that was interested in rocks, and Alyson's stones near enough fitted the bill. Alyson's brief was to meet various groups in the Lyell, to get to know some background about our university and the current mission of what our research teams were up to, and write just 3 poems. I'd arranged a very loose outline timetable of activities. I didn't want Alyson to be bored or overloaded, so I tried to get this right. I never imagined that 18 months later I'd be sitting here launching this book of Alyson's. We wouldn't have a book if it hadn't been for some generous support from a small crowd of funders: Art Earth, Graham Dixon, John Fanshawe, Mary Lawson, Tom and Margaret Lawson, John Naismith, John Sawkins, Jandy Stevenson, Ian Wall, and our principal, Richard Williams. So thank you to all of those people, some of which are probably on the call tonight. Now I will stop talking and I will let Alyson read from her work, and afterwards we'll come back and have a discussion and you'll get a chance to answer questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat. I'm super excited to be here tonight. A massive thank you to everyone for turning up. And I just wanted to extend thanks as well to the wonderful writing community in Scotland who really welcomed me when I was doing this residency. In particular, M. Strang, Lynn Davidson, Alec Findlay, Tim Cresswell, and Hamish White and Diana Hendry, who gave me the most extraordinary hospitality whilst I was doing this residency. So massive thank yous to them. So just to let you know what I'm going to do this evening, I'm going to be reading some poems with images. I'll share my screen in a little bit, and then I'm going to stop screen sharing and read some images and then show some more images. So just so you get the idea of the pattern of what's coming. Please use the chat function if you have any questions, if you want to say things about the poems as they're being read, or even if you'd like to just say where you are in the world tonight. I always think it's really nice to be quite conscious of being in this strange Zoom room and kind of putting tent pegs down in all the different places where we are in the world. I'm in Bath in Somerset, and it's a particularly wild and windy day here. Bits of branch have been flying around all over the place. So a poet in residence in the Lyell Centre, working with geologists and earth scientists. One of the things about being in a department where I have very little knowledge is that I can get up to quite a lot of mischief because I'm coming from a place of very little awareness and understanding. And one of the things I wanted to start with this evening was this idea I came up with of a universal syllabus that the principal has already referred to. I just thought, oh, I could make up my own syllabus if I wanted for the university and implicate them in that. One of the things I'm particularly interested in is a questioning of how we work with the materialities of rock and stone and what the ethics around that might be. And in particular, I'm interested in something that Donna Haraway calls making kin. How do we make kin with rocks and stones? If we didn't have rocks and stones, we wouldn't have a planet. You know, they carry us on their shoulders every waking moment and every dead moment of our lives. And one thing I wanted to think about with that is how we show respect and how we give thanks to the rocks that we work with. And, you know, some of us this evening might be in a house made of rocks. I mean, we're all certainly resting on stone and rock tonight, and it just seems polite somehow to be offering some kind of thank you for that. So I'm going to go into my screen share now, and I'll start from here. So Pat, you might want to just mute yourself while I'm doing this, so there's no incidental noise. Thank you. So this is just the little thing I put together when I was inviting people to the launch. Pick up a pebble. It will hold you together when nothing else can. This related to the well-being section of the residency, and I'm sure we'll return to that a little bit later when Pat and I have a conversation. But I wanted to bring this one up, the Universal Syllabus number 2. The next time you enter the course door, please say thank you to the rocks before you begin to work. Silently or out loud, it doesn't matter which. We are promoting a policy of gratitude first, analysis second. The university is proud to be at the forefront of recalibrating our relationships with the planet. So I wanted to set this in motion, this idea of gratitude, and I'm going to move now into the course store. I'd never been in a course store before in my life. I had no idea what it was. And I was very lucky. The course store, they only bring the rocks out in the course store twice a year. And these cores are brought from as much as 9 miles down into the earth. They drill 9 miles down, and these cores, what are called cores, are brought back up. And I was completely entranced when I went into the core stores. I had never seen anything like it, just all these samples laid out on tables. And it was extraordinary, you know, having a sense of time and being with things that have, you know, never seen light or been in the air before. So I'm going to read a couple of poems in relation to the core store. I ended up writing 7 in the end, but I'm only going to read 2. And one of the things that struck me most when I went into the room was the smell. And it was a smell that was at once familiar and quite strange. And it was the smell of oil. So the whole room was perfumed with oil that was emanating from these cores. So the first poem I'd like to read you is cause number 7. See how their bodies are laid in long, narrow boxes, so closely side by side, it's hard to tell where one ends and another begins. A perfect split or glide from grey to pink to charcoal. Each 9-meter core rubbled or broken and sliced into chunks. But who knows which way the compass spins as we tango through the oily corridors of time. Each nostril impatient to drink the dark, drug, black breath of earth. And even though there's a long way to go, let's go slowly, whispering, hello, hello. I love the idea of just saying hello to them. It only seems right to say hello to these cores in the same way that I would greet anyone or anything else as their bodies are exposed to us for analysis and understanding. The next poem, cause number 4, relates to what I was invited to do while I was in there, one of the methods that they use for analysing the cause. So this is cause number 4. I am unexpectedly invited to taste a rock. Bite off a corner, Andy says. Assess its texture with your teeth, your tongue. I wonder if he's joking. He's not. I lift the 200 million-year-old meal to my mouth. Nibble limestone from the Fulmar bed. Gritty, slightly bitter. I'm eating the earth, I say. It's science, he says. It's a menu of stone, I say, as I swallow the planet and spin through space. So that little exchange that will give you some idea of the conversations that happen sometimes, you know, where to one person it's science to nibble a rock. Whereas for me, it's like, here's a meal. I'm literally ingesting the stones that I've been looking at. And one thing that I'm perpetually interested in is how we include human beings in what we're looking at. And as I've already said, making kin and joining things up. And so I asked the two lecturers who were in the course store to just make a little experiment for me. Helen Lever and Andy Gardner, who were well up for this. I asked them to lie down so that they could be part of the continuum. Because we often see humans as being quite separate from nature, and I want to see us positioned just part of the continuum. So I was very grateful to them for lying down there and being part of it. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute because I want to talk now about language a little bit more and what it's like to come to work on a residency where some things are just completely incomprehensible to me. I was invited to a lecture about carbon storage at the Schleichner Reservoir. And I don't know about you, but when I hear the word reservoir, I think of an expanse of water with some mallard ducks on it and maybe some remote controlled boats. But that is not what this kind of reservoir is at all. It's under the seabed and it's porous rock. It's tiny, tiny gaps in porous rock. And I thought I would read an article on this to see if I could understand it a little bit better. And if anything, it just made it even more mysterious to me. And so I thought, well, what can I do with this? What can I do with scientific language that is really beyond me? And I thought, well, in the first instance, I'm just going to let myself be immersed in the joy of incomprehension. I'm just going to enjoy the sounds. And what I've done for this poem is I've sampled sections from the paper and I've interspersed it with things that I thought the human beings might have been doing while they were writing this paper. And there's a quote at the beginning of this poem from a filmmaker called Imran Peretta. And he says, if something is complex, don't try to simplify, but make it more complex instead. So that was what I attempted to do in the first instance. I thought, I'm not going to try and understand or simplify. I'm just going to be with the incomprehension. So I'll invite you now to join me in the incomprehension and see what you make of it. This is Plume of My Seismic Time-Lapse Dreams. It was a seismic time-lapse lullaby, a reservoir performance with stars that couldn't be seen. It was conformance, a walnut that wouldn't crack. Divergent outcomes swirled like galaxies adrift in a parallel universe. It was a storage site operator, a list of rules, a flask of oxtail soup, data sets acquired from the minds of machines. Dogs walked at midnight. Baseline predictive models evolved through evenings of whiskey and wine. It was a time-lapse seismic plume, a lullaby with robust geometry, pressures, boreholes, top seals, potatoes, figs, topography, an axisymmetric migration of eels. We sang, "We love you," to babies and fossils. It was a seismic time-lapse lullaby. It was strongly undulatory. I'm going to stay with the Schleichner Reservoir for the next two poems as well to show you some kind of progression of hearing about this. So after reading the paper, I went to the lecture. And again, I think one of the advantages of being a poet in a residency like this is it maybe allows me to ask things that people with more knowledge might not ask. So I can be a fool, if you like. I can think of a question and ask it, knowing that I really have very little basis of geological knowledge from which to ask that. And this poem refers to that. A poet attends a lecture on carbon storage at the Schleichner Reservoir. She listened for as long as she could, a mile or so of listening, letting the words sink into her body, her eyes distracted by the lecturer's firefly pointer that flitted from image to image. Two men at the back of the room spoke loudly, and a question formed in her mind. An egg building in size and pressure. She put up her hand, aware that she was not a scientist, not trained in matters of geology and pollution. How do we know we can store carbon inside the earth for 1 million years, she said. There was a silence, then laughter, then silence again. Pat took a photo at precisely the moment she asked the question. Or perhaps it was the second after, when the lecturer stood quietly, his two hands pressed together in front of his chest, as if he was praying. And the last one I'll read in relation to the Schleichner Reservoir refers to one of those moments when it was like a penny dropped for me and I started to understand what these little gaps were that the carbon is being put into. So this allows you to see my progression. This is called Packing an Already Full Suitcase Leads to a Momentary Understanding of Carbon Storage. As I squeezed a tube of vitamin C into a space that couldn't be seen, but was surely there, I thought of carbon storage and the long, long pipes pumping it underground into a reservoir that's not one vast empty space, but a series of small, interlinked voids. Next, I wondered if we were packing Earth like a suitcase and getting ready to leave, or designing a future where we'd be able to breathe. Deep rock, sweet rock, rock that holds us up in the galaxy like an emerald to the sun. I'm just going to share my screen again, and we will have a few more poems. So one of the things that I learned with the geologists, they like to put their finger in the photo so you can see the scale. It's a very short poem, this one, Crinoid. Backbone of a sea lily stashed in rock, little song that can't stop singing. This was from when we went on a field trip up into Kirkcaldy with Doric and Tina Scopa. It was an amazing day out. Oh, I couldn't resist putting this in. It's more of the cause store. I mentioned earlier that some of the cores were pink. Well, that's one of the pink cores. So when we were on the field trip, this is one of the images I took of a fossilized riverbed. And I wanted to read a poem. That night she dissolved into rock. The fine quartz grains grazed against her skin as they dug their way deeper into the reservoir of her body. Red, ochre, yellow, the fossilized river swam to life inside her. When morning came, she poured herself into her shoes and moved through the city in a series of inconsequential waves. I think that was after having eaten the rock as well. I was very aware of it inside my body, which I will come back to in a minute. There's always great humor out on a field trip when working with geologists. And here we've got Pat holding up the fossilized riverbed. I particularly like this photo. And I just wanted to bring this one in and to say again that so much of what I was looking at was about how to blur the edges between science and art and between human and non-human. And I'll read a poem here called More Than One. And something that interests me is how we really, really become aware of our relationship with rocks and stones, and not only the rocks and stones that are outside of us, but that are inside of us. We all have minerals in our bodies. And I sometimes wonder if one of the important questions is how we can become big enough imaginatively, how we create an imaginative field that's big enough and flexible enough to host art, science, spirit, love, curiosity all at once, rather than needing to separate them. So I'm going to read this poem, and then there's one more short poem afterwards. This is More Than One. Imagine two bodies in one. The first answers to your name, has a birthday, a belly button, a face that looks in the mirror, says, hello you, or hello me, and either way it's the same. The second body's harder to frame. An oak oxygenates each lung. Phosphorus and calcium clamber out of rock and into your arms, your legs, your skull. Who are you now when you look in a mirror and see yourself as rocks and trees, recycled water and air? Dissolve the mirror with the heat of your gaze. Be drunk, be 1,000 bodies in one. Little nod to Rumi there with the being drunk. And I'm going to finish with this. So here I am saluting the planet with my thanks. When we were on the field trip, at the end of the field trip, a photo that I think Pat took. So thank you, Pat. And a big thank you again for choosing me to do this residency, which really was a complete dream for me to spend time with rocks and stones. And as Pat says, I was commissioned to write 3 poems, and I'll maybe talk about this a bit more in the conversation, but I was possessed. And I'm going to finish with this small poem that led to the title, which again is a list of some delicious words that I decided to just let them sit as they are. Tilt, unwound nautilus, marine beds, delta plane, tilt. Carboniferous plain, local tectonics, crinoids, ossicles, tilt. Cross-bedding, zoophycus, planktonia, river dunes, cross-stratification, tilt, tilt, tilt. Thank you. I'm going to stop my screen share there. So Pat, maybe you'd like to come back.
I will come back as soon as somebody lets me come back. I started my video again. Yes, good. Well, Alyson, thank you very much. Lovely reading. I think everybody enjoyed that. I just want to make everybody clear, we don't eat all the core up over the years. Quite a bit has sort of gone missing, but it's not all been ingested. And we certainly tell people to be very careful not to swallow. It's just to get the texture. So, Alyson, and you reminded me straight at the beginning that our geoethics, so I thought I'd better pick up this piece of rock and show that it's a beautifully polished piece of rock. It has the greatest respect for this piece of rock, and it sits here beside me. So geologists do love their rocks. And making kin with rocks, I thought that was a lovely opening. I saw that Tina had picked that up as well, but making kin with rocks. And so, I feel that we made some kin with poets, and Alyson in particular. Alyson, did you feel you made some kin with the Heriot-Watt family when you arrived? I mean, how was that, arriving on a campus to this university, which you might not have known too much about before, and appearing as you did on that November morning? I mean, how was just, the preparation, how was the sort of equation, what happened before, what happened when you arrived? Because other people coming on a residency in a university might find that interesting.
Yeah, I'm not. Well, I think I arrived in Edinburgh, and as I said, I stayed with Hamish and Diana. And one of the things that did happen really, I think just before I set off to come to the university, was we walked along the river and I saw a cormorant catch a fish, which in all my years of seeing cormorants and living by the sea, I'd never seen one catch a fish before. And that felt like a very good omen, seeing the cormorant catch a fish and swallow it. And I took the bus up to Riccarton, and of course got very worried about being lost. So I asked somebody in front of me where I needed to get off. And I was so lucky. It was a really lovely student who ended up just kind of chaperoning me. I think she was studying biology, so she hosted me into the campus and then showed me around, showed me where I could get the best coffee or tea, and talked to me about the campus. And that was just lovely, the meeting of a stranger who welcomed me onto the campus. So that felt very important. And I don't know if that answers your question, but from that point on, Pat, you introduced me to a lot of people, and everyone was warm and open and really willing to engage in conversation. And somebody who didn't make it, or a poem that didn't make it into the book, was when I met Clayton McGill. And we ended up having a long conversation about forensic geology, which was mind-boggling and fascinating. And people were very generous with their time. So I hope that answers that a little bit.
I think it captures the spirit of a place where, conversations with strangers and learning about new things and talking to people is very much how the university environment should work. I know we all do rather rush around in our own little bubbles, but and it was amazing how you managed to come and break down other people's bubbles. I didn't put you in a bubble, but you managed to get into other people's space and find out more about the university than I thought I knew. You came back with information. I think you found that stone. I never knew there was a stone straight off the bus. There's that rock that was put there by the council when they cleared the site back in the 70s when Heriot-Watt established, and you found this stone in the middle of our university. So that was an omen, things like that. So you did tease out in a good geological style all sorts of information, so it was too big for you to carry away and take this stone around the world, but the spirit of Heriot-Watt travels with you in these poems, I think. So the well-being side of things, you mentioned that in one of the poems, and you also mentioned the ethics. And of course, as an institution, we are engaged in the energy transition, and carbon capture storage is one of those things. So, I think, how did you feel that we were, sort of working with this subject? How do you feel that we are trying to take on board the concerns that people have about leaving that oil in those rocks and not letting the smell come out, not letting the perfume come out?
Shall I start with the well-being first, Pat?
Yeah.
One thing at a time.
Yeah.
one of the things again that really excited me with this residency was the inclusion of having an awareness of well-being. Many years ago, I worked in mental health in Norwich and Glasgow, and so it's an ongoing interest. And I think particularly at the moment with the pandemic, but already it was something that I was very interested in. So I was really honored to be able to meet the well-being team and to think about that, and to think about my relationship with stones in terms of well-being as well. And I think that poem I had at the beginning about holding a pebble, you know, sometimes when there's almost nothing else to hold on to, you can hold a stone and somehow it holds you back. And I think I was aware of that as well, because it was around the time the residency was happening, around the time my father died. So it was the 1 year anniversary of the death of my father. So, you know, questions of well-being were really in the forefront, I think, for all of us in some way or another, because I've never met anybody who hasn't undergone great stress or trauma or grief at some point in their lives. And it was lovely just to be able to have that chance to think about stones and rocks in that relation as well. And I think I said when I was talking earlier, you know, how we become imaginatively big enough for all these things to cohabit. So we're not saying, well, geology's over there and well-being's over there. It's how do you bring them together? And, you know, so many places will have a little pile of stones or pebbles that you can pick up and hold, and it feels solid for a while. I mean, even though stones and rocks move. And I, you know, one of the things in the book is I have a lot of quotes from other people. Oh, and that's very handy. I just turned to the one I wanted without, you know, very randomly. I have one in here from Barbara Hepworth. Many people select a stone or pebble to carry for the day. The weight and form and texture felt in our hands relates us to the past and gives us a sense of universal force. I love that quote from Barbara Hepworth. The book is peppered with quotes from other people. So yeah, I don't know what I can say about the oil. I think the question of ethics is quite a big one, you know, in terms of, you know, even in terms of the Schleichner Reservoir and pumping carbon into the earth. I mean, what are the ethics of that? Do those ethics get debated? What does it mean to pump something back into the earth that may be very unhealthy for the earth, and where, you know, predictive models are saying that maybe it can be kept in there for 1 million years, but we don't really know that, because, you know, geology is such a wonderfully alive science, and these things are always changing, aren't they? That was the thing with the plume. You know, its shape was changing and not obeying predictive models. So that fascinates me, and I don't really have an answer. I like to be able to ask the questions and be a bit difficult in that sense.
Well, I think that's the important thing. People ask questions. People come, try to engage with the science, try to understand it as you clearly did, and then to ask the questions. Some of them are difficult questions, but some of them. And this whole thing around geoethics is rising to the fore. I mean, you see this coming up quite a bit, and it was interesting, Alyson, that you had a section in your, you know, we're talking about 18 months ago when you put the poetry together, you had a section on geoethics, and suddenly, you know, that's been debated quite a lot. So it is almost like a new subject that you were there as a pioneer. So. And the pebbles, of course, you know, pebbles are often, people pick up pebbles, you know, my wife picks up pebbles, we pick up pebbles, we carry them around. There's wonderful books on pebbles. There's pebbles in poems, you know, there's on Ray's Beach by Hugh McDermott, the pebbles, you know, in a way. So pebbles and poetry do go together. I mean, they fit together almost. They have the common letters, you know, pebbles and poetry have some common letters. And so I like that connection. And I hope some people are inspired to do more geologically related poetry. So the last bit of our question, because there's some questions coming through, would be on the rocks. You know, how did this enforce your love of rocks? You know, I think we got some spirit from that, but did you wish you had started out as a geologist and not wherever you had started out, Alyson, or is it too late to start getting into geology?
I'll dabble. I mean, what I enjoy about not being a geologist is having conversations with geologists. I love being in the presence of, the great knowledge and learning of other people, rather than always needing to have that knowledge myself, and then saying, well, how do we have a conversation? How do we bring our different vocabularies, our different imaginations and understandings together? What are our differences? What are our similarities? And Brian Lovell, who was president of the Geological Society, once said to me that geology could go so far, and then you needed the poets to be able to go further. So I really like that. And I think together, what we can do is really, really exciting. But that doesn't mean to say that I want to become a geologist. I don't know if I have the kind of mind who could take all that knowledge in, Pat.
Yeah, it's nice that Brian made that comment, because it's usually thrown at geologists. When there's a lack of data, especially from our geophysical friends. When you run out of data, you turn to poetry, you make things up. And so yes, geologists are meant to be very imaginative people.
Or make things up.
Yeah. So there was a question which reflects how you came out in the discussion there. I think it was from Trevor Burgess. He said, it feels like this book, some gates opened and it all poured out. It transmits some sort of liberation. Is that actually what happened? Some sort of liberation? His words.
His words. Thank you, Trevor. Great question. I think that in the beginning there was possession. Pat, you were there when I first came into the course store, and I just felt as if I was transported, as if I was taken somewhere. And it was very important to me to be with the stones before I spoke to any humans. Actually, I just wanted to be in their presence. And they, as well as emanating the smell, there's the whole sense of their beings. And the thing with the residency, and when you have a commission, so I'd been asked to write 3 poems. So that is somewhere in the back of my mind. At some point, I need to write 3 poems. When's that going to happen? But what started very early on in this residency was, besides jotting down notes, I was being woken up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. And there were lines in my head. There were questions in my head. There were phrases in my head. And this carried on for the whole week. So maybe in a way it was a liberation. I'm not sure how I'd like to define that liberation. It was liberation and exhaustion and possession and fascination. And that intrigues me. What happens when I'm in that situation? And, there are certain pressures and limitations on me. And it's maybe part liberation and part something I can't quite explain. Why me and rocks? I'm not sure I totally know the answer to that. But nice question, thank you.
So is that creative energy that you saw? Sometimes, Alyson, I don't think you'll mind me saying, it was so much you had to go and lie down in the room somewhere. You had to go right down, you just overload. So that was not in the timetable that I put together at the beginning, but clearly that was needed. And to be honest, we couldn't get Alyson out of that course store. She just loved those, and she's now calling them rocks, so she can switch from rocks to stones, because we always talk about that. Stone poetry seems to be much more associated. Stone is a word that the poets like. Rocks doesn't seem to be such a poetic word, and besides, rock poets would be something else. So there's some lovely points. Fiona has said that Alyson will find a stone if there is one there to be and find a place where no one thought there was one. So that's a comment. Some nice comments from Rachel. Delicious poem. So glad you had the chance to taste and be with the human and beyond human. So there's a question from Jackie. What inspired you to become a poet? And what kind of advice would you give someone who wants to start writing poetry? And I would say that Alyson is a great mentor and to me. So Alyson, this is your chance to inspire somebody to kick off.
And also, probably worth saying that I came to the poetry group you set up on the campus as well, Pat, which was a lovely part of the residency. Thanks for your question, Jackie. I don't really know what started it all. I remember the first poem I wrote, I think I was about 8 years old at primary school, and we had a supply teacher called Miss Brock, which means badger. And she asked us to write poems, and I wrote a poem about a dove. And we got to read it out, and then people liked it. So then people were queuing up and asking me to write poems for them. I remember writing a poem for the butcher's daughter, Anne Otten. And I don't know, I've just always written. I have always written. And I think my suggestion, if you want to write poetry, is, well, two things, two parallel tracks. One is just write, just pick up a pen or a pencil or a piece of charcoal and write and see what happens. You know, invite language in and let yourself, you know, be carried away with language. See what happens. See what language wants of you. That's quite an interesting way of coming at it. And the other parallel track is read and read and read and read. Read. There's so much amazing poetry around, particularly at the moment. And just read and immerse and see what's there. And maybe don't have too much of a preconceived idea of what you want to do. So yeah, just write, see what language wants from you, and have some fun along the way.
Some more comments about excellent reading, excellent poems, excellent asking awkward questions. That's the poet for you. Rock on, somebody has said, rather anonymously, but rock on. Somebody else said, a beautiful core sample looked just like Neapolitan ice cream. That was Helen. And there's a question here from Jen. How does Alyson feel poetry can help with our mental health? Particularly, that's a challenge for everybody at the moment, either with the process of writing it or just enjoying it. I think you've already said reading lots of poems, but does writing help as well? Getting those thoughts out onto the paper?
Yeah, I think it can really be a place where you can, well, again, maybe two things. You can pour yourself into a poem. So in that sense, it can be cathartic. And in working with language, sometimes you can name things, you can find things you didn't know were there. So that often happens in a poem, is that I'll be surprised by what emerges. But that's also where sometimes it should carry a health warning. Sometimes you always don't always want to find what emerges. So it's a spice working with language. You know? It can help, and sometimes just shaping something. I find working with language endlessly fascinating, and if I'm thinking about words, I'm not thinking about myself, so that's always a relief. And yet the sheer pleasure of reading other people's work, and again the transport in that, the world getting bigger. You know, some of the smallest poems, I mentioned Rumi earlier, and Penelope Shuttle's just the most gorgeous little book, retrieved data, very short poems, and it can just take you somewhere else. And I often find that with my mental health, if I'm not in a good place, just being taken somewhere else can be so good.
Well, spice is good as long as it's not bitter or tasteless, you know, so spice is okay, I think, you know, so that's great. There's some very deep questions here. Helen has asked, should this kind of residency become more common, you know, with our government's attack on a neglect of the arts, you know, and its willingness to take poetry out of the curriculum? Perhaps poetry needs to come with new supporters, and the world needs openness and exploration. I strongly believe that, and was I still in the university, I would be doing more to try and get poetry. We actually asked our students, instead of writing us a technical report, just write a poem at the end. Stuart Harker and myself, and some of those students did love that exercise. So bring the poetry into the science. We should all do that. Raj Lal had a question. What made you apply for the residency? What was it that attracted you, not really knowing who we were?
A friend sent it to me, actually. I hadn't seen it, and a friend sent it. And I had a look at it, and I think the linking up, well, an opportunity to be working with stones, and I can't resist, really. So yeah, all the different things. It was very, very unusual, and you don't get many residencies in a geology department. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen another one. So that's what I have to go for.
Geography is quite close to geology in some places. So Raj, I think we'd have to go back to all the 50 applicants and ask them all. And probably if the only one answered stones, then we gave it to the right person. So Rosalind is asking you, when did you realise you were in love with rocks, Alyson? And is that different than being in love with stones? Oh, my goodness, that's a tough question.
I think it's been a gradual falling in love with. I had some strange experiences with stones when I was 19. I was on a beach and I felt that I could hear echoes from the future, which had never really occurred to me before. I'd only ever thought in terms of echoes from the past, but I was on this beach and some very kind of strong things were said to me, or just came into me. And it transpired that they were then very, very important later on in my life. And some of you may or may not know that when I started working with migrating stones, that began with a dream where my grandmother, who had recently died, told me to go and climb a mountain in Wales. And it was there that I came across my first erratic, which is a stone that had traveled inside of a glacier. And I think when I realized they moved, that stones were moving all the time, that was a real shift in my love of stones and rocks. And, because we move them as humans, since we've begun, we've either been making images on stones or building Stonehenge, however that was done. That has always been there, but they also move of their own volition. In ice, there are stones in the desert in America where they're meant to move on their own. They get into the soles of our shoes. They're in the footwells of our cars. I mean, everywhere you look, stones are moving around. And I think because culturally, a lot of things tell us that stones and rocks are solid. And then here I was finding the counterpoint, the counterbalance to that, which was actually they're migrating, they're moving, and they're doing it with a lot more skill than human beings on the whole. So given that they're our oldest ancestors and they've been here from the beginning, what can I learn? And again, thank you for that lovely question.
No, that was a good question. Tim Duffy has owned up to being the one asking the difficult questions, and another poet. So I think we'll say thanks very much, Alyson, there for the moment. I think as geologists, I think the difficult thing we have is, most people think the Earth is stationary and solid, and it's always going to be the way it is, and yet we all know it as a dynamic. It's just the time scale. But what you've done is identified the fact that it's dynamic in our lifetime as well. So that's important to remember. I'll leave the question, what is more rigorous, a stone or a rock, to others. And I want to bring in Rosie now, if Gavin can enable Rosie to come in. Rosie's going to read a poem. As Alyson said, we have this poetry group, and we try to meet, and Alyson came and inspired us all. So we, thanks to the chair of court, Grant Innes, put up a reasonable amount of money and had a poetry competition. We celebrated Edwin Morgan. Edwin Morgan is a Heriot honorary alumnus, and so we celebrated his centenary, and we had a poetry competition in the style of Edwin Morgan, and Rosie was our winner. And Rosie actually works in our well-being team. So Rosie, would you like to read or introduce yourself a little bit, or read the poem?
Yeah, I just feel that I've been rudely interrupted in a really fascinating universal evening, and I'm just ending things by bringing things back to the pandemic, and I want to hear more, so I'm a bit frustrated. But thank you, Alyson, that was fantastic, and I can't wait to really discover more of your poetry. some of you may know the Morgan poem. He did some instamatic poems, which were some snapshots of moments which allowed him to comment more on wider society as well. So the snapshot, the pandemic seemed to have done such strange things to time that, slightly working from his poem, Glasgow 5th of March, I wrote Rickerton 24th, 25th, 26th, and it could have gone on March 2020. And this is it. The frozen view, no instamatic shot. The empty banks of seats, the theatre lectureless, the lectures theatreless on distant screens. Corridors longer for their emptiness, echoing with no coming and going, no laughing and greeting, no comparing and fretting, no one. A moment's masked and scurrying figure rescues a laptop to the safety of a kitchen table and spilt juice. Another mask, another laptop, another kitchen table. No instamatic shot, a loop of frozen time. The monitors blink. A disconsolate cleaner sprays and wipes and sprays and wipes the unseen foe. Again and again, we played now, tomorrow, and tomorrow. In the sunshine, the daffodils grow.
Thanks very much, Rosie. That's very nice. Perhaps we can all do this, the people that are out there. And, perhaps, Morgan's instamatic shots are like Alyson's pebbles, and so we could make that connection, and with a very different time scale, perhaps.
What made me, I was feeling that everything was so universal. It was so lovely to get with Alyson to the whole universe and forget the pandemic, because that just seems like a minor blip in the size of things that she's been looking at.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it will be a blip. I don't think it'll ever be minor. So that does bring us to the end. Now, thanks very much, Rosie. We've got one more person that we want to introduce to say a vote of thanks. And if the system works, we'll see Tina Scoper appear and we'll hear her. Thanks very much, Rosie.
Thanks, Rosie. Well done.
So Tina is she's the chair of the Scottish Institute of Geopoetics, the Scottish Institute of Geopoetics, and it's great to have Tina both on the field trip where she hosted us in Kirkcaldy and to say a vote of thanks. Tina.
I just want to thank you first of all, Pat, for including me in all of this and indulging my my mission to get a geologist or someone who knew about fossils to come out here to Kirkcaldy to see what I was discovering for my very own first time. I'd never discovered fossils, and I started finding these and learning about them. So this field trip was just fantastic, and I just want to say thank you so much, Alyson, for this evening and for this beautiful talk. It was just so rich and diverse and so beautiful, and I feel I really resonate myself with your own way of looking at the world in this huge kind of picture. I was a scientist myself to begin with, and then an artist, and I feel the way that you relate to the rocks is particularly the way I relate to the plants, and this sense of respect and kind of honoring this sort of this greater universe and what it can teach us, listening, tuning into it and being a part of it, and being, I loved how you had the lecturers lying down as part of the core samples. And I just kind of love that, the idea that we are, we are part of it. And that's the way I look at the plants too, I kind of see that this is all this life force, and this life force is expressing itself through us and through the plants equally, but just in different forms. And what else can I say? I don't know. I just really enjoyed our day together. We had a cafe trip and a lunch trip and all the hunting around with the fossils and the rocks, and it was just wonderful to share the science. I really resonate too with you with this kind of often incomprehensible science, and just digging into that, but then also keeping that human, questioning, creative, imaginative, poetic part alive too. So it's just wonderful. And hopefully, and the fact that you did this, Pat, and you made this happen and hadn't happened before within the university, I think is just so brilliant. And it would be great if, as we go forward now, this could be kind of more normal and more usual. So I just want to say thank you all. And it was just a really beautiful talk, a really beautiful evening as well. And thanks for including me.
No, thank you, Tina. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will honour the promise I made to you to try and bring a whole group of people to Kirkcaldy, and we can all do this live. I think that would be very special. So I think that brings us to the end of the evening. Once again, Alyson, I'll thank you so much. I think, Gavin, you've got some information. If people want to buy the book, then they have two options. They can either buy it from me, and all the money, apart from the postage for me sending things out to you, will go to the Watt Club to support our students, or you can buy it directly from Alyson, and that will support her activity. So you have two options if you want to buy that book. And you can contact either Alyson directly or myself directly.
My email address in the chat box. So if anybody wants to get in touch for a signed copy, then do.
Thanks,
they are all numbered, I think, Alyson, aren't they?
They are. It's a limited edition. It's a limited edition book, yeah.
And I just want to echo what Tina's just said. Thank you so much to Pat, particularly, and Alyson for joining us this evening. This has been fascinating. I've loved it. Alyson, you asked a really good question at the beginning, which I forgot to ask. So I apologise. When you asked the audience where they were joining from, and I love that question. And we've had people this evening joining from New York, from The Hague, from Canterbury, of course, the Southwest, and Croydon and Edinburgh. So it's been great to see such a fantastic mix, and there's a real warmth out there. So thank you to everyone. And also, I just want to say how grateful I was that you were doing the reading, particularly when you read Tilt, because I could never have got the pronunciation as spot on as you did. So thank you. I've loved this. I really have, and we do a lot of events online, obviously now, and this content is just terrific. So thank you so much.
And thank you, massive thank you to you as well, Gavin, for hosting it, being the hostess with mostess.
You're very welcome. If I may, I'm going to, I guess, draw things to a close, if that's okay. I genuinely could stay on for hours and talk to Alyson, but I'm sure nobody wants to hear me drone on. I've just got a few things to say. So I've said thank you. In terms of what we do in the Watt Club, so we have a few events coming up in June, which I'd love to bring to your attention. We have our annual stakeholder meeting coming up on the 17th of June. And after that, on the same day, on the 17th of June, we're actually going to be joined, I'm sorry, my screen share is not working. We're going to be joined on the 17th of June by Sheila Mary Carruthers and Tammy Kane for our next Talent and Conversation event, which should be fascinating. So Tammy is the co-founder of Christopher Kane, the fashion label, and on the 17th of June. And the following week, on the 24th, we're going to have an event on advancing diversity and inclusion through a pandemic. So some fascinating content coming up next month. And if you just visit our website, you can find out more information. And all that remains for me to say once again is thank you for watching. And if you want to find out more about the Walk Club and what we do, then please do visit our website and our social media accounts. Thanks again to our fantastic speakers this evening. Thoroughly enjoyed our event this evening. Thank you.
Thank you,
Gavin.
Thank you.